For the last time, Parkfield Community School has not stopped its No Outsiders program. This is the second time that the papers have reported such, only for the school to come forward and correct them on said misinformation. I was on holiday in the Netherlands meeting family there when this claim that Parkfield had indefinitely ended its No Outsiders program popped up, and I remember feeling utterly crushed over it. Part of the reason why was the fact that I was certain that surely the papers couldn't be making the same mistake as I'd covered in my previous video on Parkfield, all three of which can be found below in the description by the way. But as it turns out, they had made the same mistake. Following a meeting with the Regional Schools Commissioner, Parkfield released the following statement on March the 13th. Nothing is more important than ensuring our children's education continues uninterrupted. Yesterday, both parents and the trust held constructive discussion with the Regional Schools Commissioner, and as a result of these discussions, we are eager to continue to work together with parents over the coming days and weeks to find a solution that will support the children in our school to continue their education in a harmonious environment. Until a resolution has been reached, No Outsiders lessons will not be taught at Parkfield, and we hope that children will not be removed from school to take part in protests." End quote. Now this echoed previous statements by Parkfield, who were quick to note the fact that No Outsiders was never intended to be taught this semester. Instead, this semester has been allocated to RE, religious education. Therefore, by stating the honest truth that No Outsiders lessons had been stopped, Parkfield hoped that the parents would stop taking their children out of school for the time being. This would allow Parkfield to maintain said children's education whilst handling the parents' prejudice, hopefully resolving the issue in time for when the No Outsiders program had been scheduled to resume. And I can completely sympathise with that. Whilst the school does not want to be seen as capitulating to the demands of the willfully ignorant bigots such as the parents protesting, they still have an obligation to ensure the best education possible for their children. It's just a shame that the papers don't seem capable of grasping such a simple concept. The lessons were never going to be taught at this time, so let's make that clear in hopes that parents will allow their children back to school. Meanwhile, we can try to educate the parents. It's all a very simple plan, but sadly, the way the papers are reporting it, I feel it may embolden the bigots. Bigots such as Amir Ahmed.
Morally, we do not accept homosexuality as a valid sexual relationship to have. And it's not about being homophobic.
Because some people might think that's what you are.
Well, you see, that's like saying that, if you don't believe in Islam, you're Islamophobic.
Except that's a blatant lie. An accurate comparison would be claiming that a white nationalist who believes their children being taught that Muslims exist and shouldn't be the targets of constant abuse is brainwashing them, that's Islamophobia. Which, yeah, it is. Here you make a false comparison between believing what you believe and treating LGBT+ people with a basic level of human decency. The two are not the same, and it's appalling that you even attempt to conflate the two. By all means, do show me a single person who is demanding that you get on your knees and start sucking cock, else you're homophobic. Because that's a closer comparison. It still differs in the fact that a person's gender and sexuality is an immutable part of their character, your religion is not, but it is closer than what you're trying to claim the No Outsiders program is doing, which is utter crap. No Outsiders isn't even a sex and relationship program, it's just dishonest people, such as yourself, have asserted it is. No Outsiders is a citizenship curriculum based on the 2010 Equalities Act. It teaches students to treat others with dignity and respect, regardless of ethnicity, religion or belief, sexual orientation, gender, or disability status. Amongst that, it talks about non-nuclear households who fellow students may belong to. For example, it talks about children who have been adopted, are raised by a member of the extended family, or yes, are raised by same-gender parents. Things that actually exist and are observable in said students' daily lives. Do you want to take a stab at what isn't observable? Your God. Gay people exist even in your community. That's a fact one of the parents protesting threw out there to try and shield herself from being labelled a bigot.
I'm just upset about the school they're teaching our children about the LGBT community, and it's something that we would like to teach our children ourselves, and it's kind of like they're forcing it upon our children, so planted ideas in their head. I just don't want them to learn that yet, the whole knowing what a gay person is. We're around them, obviously. There's so many in our community, but we accept that that's how they are, and and that's the way their life is, and everyone's different, and we accept it, but forcing upon our children to know at such a young age, if it was at secondary school, would be like, okay, fine.
So what would you say to those people who are watching this at home who might think that your views are homophobic?
I would say that I don't think my views are homophobic at all. It's just basically what we're teaching our children. I've got gay friends, I know lots of gay people, and I accept how they are.
Are you saying that you're happy for your child to be taught about homosexuality and LGBT rights when she's older?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Because why do they need to know now? Like it's just mind-boggling for them. They wouldn't understand it.
And many of our points are one shared by Amir Ahmed.
Some of the books include same-sex couples, so 2 mummies, 2 daddies. Is that really putting pressure on somebody to be gay? Is that what you're saying? You are worried that it is saying to somebody, it's okay to be gay?
Well, similar to me and you, we're mature people and we can understand what it means and what the significance of it is. But to a 4 or 5 year old, you're implanting a seed, an idea that same-sex relationships are morally fine. That's the beginning of it. And that's how it has been designed, this No Outsiders program.
No, the No Outsiders program has been designed to tackle bullying and hopefully through a ripple effect, hate crime on a national level. Not just of LGBT+ people, by the way, but all people. It's no more a gateway to being LGBT+ than it is a gateway to being disabled or Muslim. Hell, it discusses heterosexual and cisgender people as well. So it's as much planting the seeds of heterosexuality and cisgenderism as it is planting the seeds of LGBT+ people. All it does in relation to LGBT+ people is ensure that LGBT+ children grow up secure in themselves and that non-LGBT+ children treat them with due respect. You can't change a person's gender or sexuality. That is a solid fact agreed upon by both science and human rights organisations internationally. Another fact, 1 in 2 children at Parkfield are going to be something other than entirely heterosexual. And that's just sexuality. We haven't even discussed gender yet. All these programs do is teach all students to respect one another in spite of that. Why? Because bullying is still rampant, whether or not you want to pretend otherwise. Also, thank you for confirming that, yes, you are a homophobic bigot. You, like your friend, hold ignorant prejudices against same-gender relationships. How do I know that? You are perfectly fine with said students being taught about opposite-gender relationships, yet not same-gender ones. Why? Well, the only reason is if you think that one is lesser or more harmful than the other, when they aren't. Same-gender relationships are no more sexual than opposite-gender ones. They're no more dangerous either. If a student at that age can understand mummy and daddy, they can also understand daddy and daddy or mummy and mummy to the same degree. So to argue otherwise is a clear-cut case of prejudice on your part, one which, yes, stamps you as a homophobic bigot. And just as a racist doesn't get to decide what is and is not racism, you don't get to deem yourself not homophobic when all evidence shows you very clearly are. That's just the way reality works. Don't like being called a homophobic bigot? Well, stop being one, or at least hide it. What you don't do is cry like this.
In terms of victimisation, tell me a bit about that, how the community is feeling at the moment.
Well, the community feels frightened and they feel that here they can't speak out because the school may call the social services on them or the police or for some strange reason they may be arrested.
If you're going to neglect your children, actively jeopardising their health and well-being for your ideological tenets, don't be surprised when strangers take a problem with your neglect. As already noted, 1 in 2 of your children will be something other than entirely heterosexual. They will pick up on the bigotry you and the rest of the parents are displaying publicly. And whilst it won't change who they are, it will force them to either hide who they are and live a shallow life, or risk further abuse. Fact, 1 in 2 trans teens have attempted suicide, and yet the rates of depression and anxiety responsible for that attempted suicide, they drop down to levels equal to that of a cis teen if they're accepted. Cis or cisgender being those who identify with their birth-assigned gender, the opposite of transgender, if you will. Likewise, a US study comparing the impact of growing up in a supportive versus rejective household found that LGBT+ individuals from households who rejected them on the basis of being LGBT+ were, quote, more than 8 times as likely to have attempted suicide, nearly 6 times as likely to have reported high levels of depression, more than 3 times as likely to use illegal drugs, and more than 3 times as likely to be at high risk of HIV and sexually transmitted diseases. End quote. That is the cost of your bigotry. And it's not you who suffers, it's your child. That is neglect. And I don't care what your religious beliefs are. There's no religion on this earth that has the right to abuse a child. Social services should be getting involved at this point. There should be government sanctions in place to remove children from households effectively protesting for the allowance of neglect. I mean, could you imagine if this protest was about allowing parents the right to starve their child? Hopefully, we'd see that for the appalling thing it is. But when it's LGBT+ lives on the line, suddenly not a shit is given. But it doesn't have to be this way. Openly gay Muslim Kakan Qureshi had this to say on the whole issue.
I think at the heart of this, the attitudes is very much homophobic. No matter how people are packaging it, whether it's, tradition, culture, religions, we can't step away from who we are. That's part of our identity. But with a religion, at least you can step away from it and you have a choice. Whereas when you are part of the LGBT community, and in particular saying that it's a gay agenda, that is homophobic. Well, hopefully we'll have more dialogue and conversations with the school and the protesters and look for a way forward. But at the end of the day, this is about equalities and the Human Rights Act as well, and we need to ensure that people are educated about this, and in particular we have to be considerate of the children who are being affected by what is going on.
And he's right. Those fighting in support of the No Outsiders programme are doing so to save LGBT+ lives. We're fighting so that less children end up in coffins, because that's what has happened in previous generations and continues to happen today. It happened when Moffat grew up under Thatcher's Section 28. It happened whilst I was at school, and nothing, as far as I'm aware, has changed. The only way we can walk away from being LGBT+ is to commit suicide. These parents, along with Emir Ahmed, are fighting to keep children ignorant, to be allowed not only to neglect them themselves, but stop schools from resolving said neglect. To protest against No Outsiders is to protest for dead children. So you should be afraid, and the government should grow a spine to enact repercussions for neglect. Now it's about to get a little heavy as I go on to share some of my experiences at school. I've talked about my bullying in the past, but I've never really gone into detail. I was the only student who was out in my entire school, and I wasn't out on my own discretion. In year 10 I trusted the wrong person, and before I knew it, the rest of the school knew I was dating a guy. What followed were 2 years of constant hell, during which I received multiple beatings, had snow forced down my PE shorts as I was pinned down, had urine poured over my head as I walked home from school. Not to mention, I was inappropriately grabbed a lot, often to cries of, "So you like that?" both from guys and girls. And I used to report it all, but eventually I just gave up. Especially after a certain incident. It was during PE, physical education, which, to be honest, was where a lot of my abuse took place, and I was up for batting in cricket. My PE teacher, for that lesson, he was wicketkeeper. That means he stood directly behind me, concentrating on both me and the bowler. That's when the bowler steps up to the pitch, but instead, he starts throwing homophobic slurs at me, as all I could do was just stand there, taking the abuse. My teacher said nothing. Not then, not later. This is years after the repeal of Section 28. All eyes from the whole class were on me and my abuser. And the teacher did nothing. I know for a fact that 2 of the other students in that class were also LGBT+. Both came out after they left that school, and can you really blame them? Now, one was the pansexual I mentioned in my recent video to Luxander. The other was a friend of my abuser, and only last year contacted me on Facebook to apologise for not saying anything to his friends who would constantly attack me. And I don't blame them for staying quiet. Hell, I'm still angry at my abuser, but he was a fucking kid with a shitty education. Who I'm really furious at is my teacher for standing aside and just letting another student abuse me in front of everyone. That sent a clear message. Abusing LGBT+ people was acceptable. And yet still, that's a whole level below having your parents pull you from school to fight for their right to hold LGBT+ inclusive, not specific, but inclusive anti-bullying resources. But the message is much the same in that it's the child's right to bully LGBT+ children, or the right of other children to bully them as an LGBT+ child, or the child of LGBT+ parents. That's what these children are learning from these protests. That's what's being cemented in their minds, that LGBT+ folk are second-class citizens not deserving of the same rights and protections as everyone else. And that's part of why I refuse to sit by and say nothing. I can't do much from where I am, but I am doing what I can. Why? Because even though I'm no longer at school, I'm not some apathetic monster who doesn't care about the people who come after me. I see abuse, I challenge that abuse. It's a very personal thing to give back what I wish I'd received. But of course, the denial continues.
But what would you say to the criticism that you are homophobic because you are going against a core principle of British values, that everybody is equal, everybody deserves to be welcomed and appreciated in society? So should children not be taught about homosexuality and same-sex couples?
Well, we're not going against any core principle of British values. The children and the parents at Parkfield were always respectful and tolerant of all human beings. And when Mr. Moffat came into the school as a openly gay teacher, they treated him as just like any other teacher, with respect and tolerance.
I'm saying to you now that your children will not be safe so long as that Moffat is in this school.
It's actually aggressively promoting them, giving it a positive spin and telling people that it is okay for you to be Muslim and for you to be gay. Mr. Moffat, shame, 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 shame.
The school are running a program called No Outsiders, which teaches our children that it is okay to be gay, and the parents have been outraged by such teaching. It goes contrary to our children's belief and the parents' belief.
Morally, we do not accept homosexuality as a valid sexual relationship to have.
That's not respectful, that is bigoted, and that is regardless of the source of that belief. Again, you are labelling same-gender relations as lesser or more harmful than opposite gender relations. That's the same as labelling people of colour as lesser or more dangerous. Love is an important part of life to most people. You can't just cut that out and pretend that you don't have a problem with the person, that you respect them. That would be a bold-faced lie. However, I also want to tackle the imperialistic pinkwashing behind the statement core principle of British values. There are two means to critique this. First of all, anti-LGBT+ viewpoints are still present in the UK, and I'm not on about British Muslims. One of the videos I showed had a white man claiming that Andrew Moffat was an active danger to children. Now, I showed it in relation to what Amir Ahmed said, since it was Muslim parents cheering him on. But that man was the founder of the Christian organisation Christian Voice UK. Now, they're a relatively small group, but they're just the tip of the iceberg. I faced active abuse at my time at university, and there were organisations which still openly discriminate, such as the putrid evangelical organisation, the Salvation Army. And since Brexit emboldened a lot of bigots, urging them to take back control, LGBT+ hate crime has increased as well. Because that's the thing about bigotry. Someone who partakes in one sort rarely restricts themselves to a single demographic. Normally, people who spout nonsense about things such as racial purity also take issue with women, LGBT+ folk, and those with disabilities. Secondly, many of the nations we colonised were accepting of homosexuality. India, for example, saw a Brahmin, so a member of the priest caste, having sex with another man on par with having sex with a menstruating woman. There was a cleaning ritual involved after, but that was it. Then we came along and imposed Section 377 in 1862, a law designed to criminalise homosexuality that was only ruled unconstitutional in 2018, 156 years later. And wouldn't you know it, the Middle East was much the same. Many queer icons such as Oscar Wilde travelled to the Middle East and expressed their joy at said occurrence. In a letter, Gustave Flaubert stated the following about male homosexuality. Quote, "Here it is quite accepted, and it is spoken of at the table in the hotel. Sometimes you do a bit of denying, and then everybody teases you and you end up confessing." End quote. And it wasn't just queer authors who spoke of it. Europeans lodged complaints about said happenings. Former engineer in the French Navy, Charles Sannini, had the following to say, quote, "The passion contrary to nature constitutes the delight, or, to use a juster term, the infamy of the Egyptians. It is not for the women that the amorous ditties are composed. It is not on them that the tender caresses are lavished. Far different objects inflame them. This horrid deprivation, which, to the disgrace of polished nations, is not altogether unknown to them, is generally diffused over Egypt. The rich and the poor are equally infected with it." End quote. Sadly, it couldn't last. Charles Lindholm stated the following about northern Pakistan in 1982. Quote, "Homoerotic relationships were much more common a generation ago than they are now, since Western influence has brought a sense of shame about homosexuality, at least among the more educated." End quote. So it's not nearly as black and white as we may think. What's happening at Parkfield isn't wrong because it goes against still shifting British values. It's wrong because it violates basic safety and dignity as offered via international human rights, which, funnily enough, was ensured by the European Convention on Human Rights. That meant an EU nation couldn't backslide on LGBT+ rights without facing repercussions, which is one of the reasons many LGBT+ folk despise the farce which is Brexit, because we don't trust the UK to keep the protections currently in place. So can we do away with this lie of a noble Britain? Also, the students and indeed many of the parents at the school are British. That's not the problem. The problem is our well-being is not secondary to their beliefs. I'd also like to respond to the claim that
it goes contrary to our children's belief and the parents' belief.
It does not go contrary to your child's beliefs. It goes contrary to what the parents of said children have forced them to identify with. There's a key difference. The fact that this program was implemented 4 years ago without causing an issue, that kind of destroys this assertion. It only became a problem when parents unfairly linked no-outsiders to sex and relationship education. Note, the parents, not the children.
You're saying that people in the community are not homophobic,
Yeah.
that they would be happy to embrace somebody who is in a same-sex relationship. Is that correct?
Well, they will respect people who are in a same-sex relationship as you know, individuals who have chosen a certain lifestyle.
How would you feel if somebody from your family came to you and said that I am gay?
Well, look, it would certainly be a worry and concern for us, but that child is a human being and has to be treated as such.
The problem comes in discovering what that entails. Now, you're rather vague here, but thankfully one of the parents protesting shed a little more light on this during a BBC4 interview.
But, I mean, there's no suggestion whatsoever that a primary school would be encouraging gay activity. They are simply pointing out that it is something that you might, at the age of 10, 11, you might be that. And you need to know that you're going to be safe and that you're going to be all right and there's nothing to be concerned about. What's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with that if it's brought in from the parent. But for me, as a Muslim woman, for the idea that it's going to be normalised to my child, that's the part that I'm not okay with, because it's not in line with my religion.
But with the greatest respect, it might be normal for your child.
And if it is, I will deal with it in the matter that's still in line with my religion. Like I said, being homosexual is not what's frowned upon in Islam. It's the act of homosexuality. It's the conducting of sexual relations in a homosexual manner. So I would I tried to guide my child to still be in line with Islam, whilst, you know, being who they are. At the end of the day, they're born that way. I'm not going to love them any less. I'm not going to treat them any less, but I want to have it on my terms, and I have that right as a parent.
Thank you very much for talking to us.
No, you don't have the right to actively neglect your child at best, abuse them at worst, because that's what you are forwarding here. You seem to be suggesting that you would force your child down a path of abstinence, which doesn't just not work, it's actively damaging. Unless that child is ace, they're going to explore their sexuality as they mature. It's better they do so in an environment where they feel supported. What you suggest will result in an increase in risk-taking behaviour as well as mental health problems. It will make them very open to predation by others who feign the love and support you very clearly lack for your child. And the school has a duty to prevent that, to protect your child when you refuse to. And the school's hands are legally bound in that regard, as the head teacher explained during said interview.
But let's talk then about what your legal obligations are. As I understand it, as our education correspondent pointed out earlier, you have to teach this.
Well, this is the real crux of the matter. So I'm very glad you've asked me about this. Even before the relationship education new policy starts next year, all public sector workers have to adhere to the public sector equality duty that is laid out in the Equality Act 2010. So that law has been there for 9 years. That isn't an education law, it's a law that applies to everybody. And there's a specific section, section 149, that is about public sector workers. And that says things like you must eliminate discrimination, tackle prejudice, seek to foster good relations between people who have a characteristic, protected characteristic, and those who don't. It uses the word promote once in that section. It says we must promote understanding of all aspects of the Equality Act.
And that is all that is being done. Students are not being taught how to have gay sex in lessons. These lessons, which are simply LGBT+ inclusive, encompass treating all demographics with the respect and dignity they deserve, including adherents of Islam. However, Thana can't handle that fact.
Right. It's promote understanding.
Yes.
Thana, you seem a reasonable parent. You certainly sound it. What's wrong with promoting understanding? Because you say yourself you have gay friends.
Yeah, it's not about promoting understanding. We can promote as parents the understanding on our terms in line with our religion. Where we draw a line is where it's being taught, where we have no control, no say in the matter. And I believe more than anything, like for me as a level-headed person, as a level-headed mother and a Muslim woman, I believe like in my mind, if the time that I would ever talk to my daughter about it would be when it naturally got brought up. If she saw, for instance, a same-sex couple in front of her, that's when I would explain it to her. I would explain it to her in a diplomatic way.
If your religion subtracts from the promoting understanding as discussed, then it's not promoting understanding. That's the opposite of promoting understanding. It's promoting active ignorance on your part. As for when you'd explain it, that's not good enough. The first openly gay, bisexual or transgender person your child might realise could be themselves. And after all the hate and intolerance launched at the LGBT+ community, they're not likely going to feel able to approach you about that. I mean, I never saw my mum or dad being homophobic like you lot, but I still couldn't approach them about it because I was terrified. So to have a parent as intolerant to the mere acknowledgement that LGBT+ people exist, that they're going to be your peers or the parents of your peers, that must be genuinely terrifying. And yet, their denial is so strong. But that's what happens in situations like this.
And you're a Muslim parent.
I am a Muslim parent, yeah.
Tell me about your own upbringing. Did you have these lessons at school?
We did have them in the school, but I was pulled out of them. I was born and raised in the UK. I've had pretty much my entire family life has been, teaching me, their views or my religious views about, homosexuality. Obviously, in my religion, it is something that is wrong. Homosexuality itself is not the wrong. Being homosexual is not wrong. The act of homosexuality that they engage in is what's wrong within my religion. So I've been brought up to have that ideology, but I've turned out to be a person who's completely respectful of everyone around me. I have many homosexual friends or gay friends. I have many. I even have distant family members within the LGBT community.
So gay life, gay people are not unknown to you in any way?
Absolutely,
Okay.
and I'm very, very okay with them.
What about that, Thana?
With regards to that, I just go back to my own upbringing. I was taught that it wasn't the right thing, but it didn't develop into me not understanding LGBTQ. It didn't develop into me not tolerating LGBT. You can't be. It's not correlate. It's not directly correlated. It's almost you're kind of pinning. All the troubles and trials, the trials and tribulations of what the LGBT community have been through. As a minority, you're kind of pinning them on a thing that has nothing to do with it. At the end of the day, we should all be able to raise our children the way that we see fit. That's all it is. It's our right as parents. We bear these children for 9 months. We raise them how we see fit. It doesn't mean it's not directly correlated. It doesn't mean at the end of it they're going to be hateful.
Well, you're strong evidence to the contrary to what you say. You were pulled from such classes, and here you are parroting bigoted talking points on a national radio station. Contrary to what you seem to believe, simply repeating, I respect gay people, and pulling, I have LGBT plus friends or family members card, does nothing to do with your blatant bigotry. You are actively stigmatizing LGBT plus folk, calling their relationships lesser and wrong. You cannot do that and claim to respect them any more than you can call a black person lesser or violent and claim such. I mean, you can say that, but it doesn't make it true. You, just as with Emir Ahmed, are a bigot who doesn't want to be called out on the fact that they are one. And I will not be duped by such childish pretenses, nor the hypocrisy.
I think by doing this, by almost infringing on people's rights, you're kind of you're stigmatizing it and making it into a thing, and it's becoming a negative thing. It's building resentment within people who would otherwise be very kind of, I hold the ethos of live and let live, to each their own. Everyone is free to live as they want, but it's making me, rather than being reactive to when the situation arises, I want to be almost proactive if it is introduced.
Right, but you're a proactive parent, and Sarah, you must have pupils at your school whose parents would not be proactive and wouldn't teach them these things.
Absolutely, or even teach them the opposite. So one of the placards that was held outside my school was Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. So that, for me and for most of my school community and staff, is incredibly inflammatory and actually is not tolerant or respectful, and it's not tackling any kind of prejudice. It's actually fueling prejudice.
So standing up for our rights as LGBT plus folk, which includes our right to exist and our right to dignity, that's stigmatizing Muslims according to you. Meanwhile, you actively going out and claiming that we're sinful and wrong, that students shouldn't be taught to accept and respect us and their LGBT plus peers, that's perfectly fine. That's respectful discourse. I'm just sick of the idea that the bigots get to decide that they're not bigots. So much the conversation has turned to that when they should just be branded for what they are and the conversation moves on. One thing I did find particularly interesting, however, was the way in which the head teacher exposed this little fact about the Parkfield protests.
Well, let's try and put it in perspective. How many children have you got at the school?
We've got nearly 700.
Right, so big primary school, that.
Yes.
And of those 700 children, obviously you're talking about over 1,000 parents, how many have joined the protests or complained?
The protests were led by somebody who doesn't have any children, and he was supported by a parent who has children at a different school. So that was interesting. So it's a bit difficult to tell how many were our parents and how many weren't. Our parents, when we were out there, seemed about 10 or 20 at most.
I see. So actually, most people haven't joined the protest.
Absolutely.
So it's best to keep that in mind when reading or listening about what's going on at Parkfield. Note, this interview took place on the 25th of March. However, another thing which was discussed was the impact of the protest, both on the students and the teachers at Parkfield School.
So what do you think? That suggests to me that the protests aren't actually something you need to worry about all that much.
Well, we worry about them because they've affected children. Even with a few voices and a loud hailer, you can inflict a lot of distress on people. We've had children who are crying because one of the chants was using my surname, Hewitt Clarkson, step down, Hewitt Clarkson, you're a liar. So that isn't very pleasant to hear
No.
if you're a child in my school and I'm the head teacher, and I have to remain dignified and cannot go out. I can go out and speak, but I also have to make a judgment about how that looks and what that might antagonise.
Yeah, forgive me, I certainly didn't mean to suggest that this was something insignificant and not deeply concerning. It obviously is.
This was a sentiment echoed by Hazel Pulley, the Trust CEO of the school, in another interview with the BBC.
This has been going on for 10 weeks now, and you've only just decided to speak out. Surely you should have spoken out sooner.
Well, we did start meeting with some of the parents, but it quite quickly became aggressive and quite personal to certain members of the staff. There were activists in the background who were coming in and really shaking up the situation. So very, very quickly, it became quite a different agenda. It became quite aggressive. The impact on the staff has been tremendous. There are people who said they're losing weight. Some of them said they can't sleep. Some of them have been shaking when they come to school. It was quite difficult for us to stand up and not look as if it was becoming us and them.
It's very clear from the parents that I've spoken to that they want you gone, that they don't trust you, they don't feel that you are able to control the school. What would you say to those parents?
But leadership isn't one person, is it? It's a group of people. And we've got a group of people here who can easily work with our parents alongside myself and talking with myself. We can work together to rekindle what apparently has been lost. There are some fantastic families around here, and whatever way they want to bring their children up is fine. But in school, they need to be educated to the law of the land, and at home, they can follow their religion, and that's fine.
A quick reminder that Andrew Moffat, the creator of No Outsiders, has had active threats made against them. That's the sort of thing these teachers are dealing with, and Andrew Moffat has been rather hurt by all of this. Seeing parents poison their child's mind against him, it's just harrowing. It was almost a relief to see Andrew Moffat having a great time at the Global Teaching Awards on the 23rd and 24th. And I'd just like to pause to congratulate Kenyan Peter Tabachi on his win. May the money received help the people of Purani Village and the surrounding area. Andrew was of course one of 10 finalists selected from hundreds of thousands of teachers all around the globe for their work on improving education. And whilst Andrew didn't win, the fact that he made it to the final 10 was amazing in and of itself. And that's the thing about No Outsiders. Multiple government and private establishments have looked into the suitability and impact of No Outsiders. In 2016, an Ofsted report came out in full support of No Outsiders. For those who don't know what Ofsted is, it's the Office for Standards in Education, Children's Services and Skills. Its primary occupation is to ensure the child's quality of education, and they had many good things to say about the programme. So much in fact that a year later, Andrew Moffat was awarded an MBE. Now, I take issue with the idea of celebrating British imperialism, even if only in ceremonial language. But that does not then remove the fact that after extensive government review on 2 separate instances, Andrew Moffat was rewarded for his outstanding contributions to education. So contrary to what the protesters may say, No Outsiders vastly improves the quality of life not just for LGBT+ students, but all students. Because reminder, No Outsiders is LGBT+ inclusive, not focused. Here are the topics it covers, none of which are specifically focused on LGBT+ individuals. That's why the active chief of Ofsted came out in vocal support of Andrew, Parkfield, and all the people working to keep No Outsiders. And on the same day as this BBC4 interview, the former head of Ofsted had this to say.
Here's a brief glimpse into the thinking of the former head of Ofsted, Sir Michael Wilshaw, who was on Today this morning.
These people who have these very conservative views, sincerely held, have also got to accept that they're living in this country with the values that this country holds. And they've got to balance those two issues. And having worked in Birmingham and dealt with the Trojan horse issues, that I came up against that issue all the time. Conservative religious people upholding their views, and they were right to do that, sincerely held views, but also they've got to understand that they're living in this country in a pluralistic society with liberal values that strongly believes that people should be treated fairly and equally.
So this idea that No Outsiders doesn't offer something in way of supporting LGBT+, disabled, ethnic minority, and indeed all students, just doesn't hold water. I would have killed for a teacher like Andrew at my school. But the pretense that this has no impact is a sham, much like the claim that it's not age appropriate or that it violates the rights of the parents. Parents were consulted when the program first began. The problem is, the school can't force parents to take an active interest. They can't chain people to the seats. They can only announce the fact that they're working on this new thing, attend these meetings if you want, and we'll work from that. So they did. And now, 4 years down the line, we have a group of parents who didn't take part in that, pretending like their parental rights are being trampled on. But none of that stands to any sort of scrutiny. Now, I'm not exactly sure as to how many more of these videos I should make. By this point, I feel like I'm beating a bit of a dead horse on the whole bigotry thing. No matter how many times these people assert that they're respectful of LGBT+ people, if they keep pretending like our being or our love is any less or any more wrong than that of a cis-het person, that is prejudice. That is bigotry. Case closed. It's not their right to neglect their child, and it's certainly not their right to enforce schools adhere to said neglect. By teaching that LGBT+ people exist, whether it be their peers or their peers' family, only two things will happen. The LGBT+ students at that school will grow up secure in themselves and live happier and healthier lives for doing so. Meanwhile, the non-LGBT+ students will learn to respect their LGBT+ peers and family members. By challenging both hetero and cis normativity before it sets in, we can prevent homophobic, biphobic, and transphobic hate crime before it becomes a problem. This is a preventative measure that improves the quality of life for all involved. Because, for the last time, No Outsiders is LGBT+ inclusive, not focused. Now, I'll link a couple of petitions down below, so feel free to sign them and show support for both Andrew and Outsiders. But outside of that, I'm not exactly sure as to what I can really do here, outside of responding to the lies put out by these people as they become publicly available. But what do you guys think? Should I continue to cover the topic as new media becomes available? Should the government step in to swiftly end what is effectively a protest for a parental right to neglect their child? If this is happening now, what's going to happen when they actually introduce compulsory sex and relationship education in 2020? Can you respect someone whilst claiming they're immoral? Did I miss something you noticed? If so, be sure to leave a comment down below. As always, I'll link a couple of videos at the end of this one. You can also support us on Patreon. We're trying to make the channel ad-free, so be sure to check that out. I'd also like to say a big thank you to all our Patreon sponsors for making what we do possible. I'd also like to give a special thanks to the following people: Hannah Banghart, Matthew Kovac, Brad R., McGay, John Schoenrock, Daniel Martinez, Evan Heinberg, Alexander Williams, and Atlas5. Take care now, and I'll see you next time.